All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Stacks 2.1, or I'm sorry, Community SIP call number 20. Actually, I believe this one is. But I got 18 on here, so we're going to go with that. My name is Jason. I am hosting in place of Hero today. So I also go by Will Buddy. And we're excited today because we have a guest speaker. Codex.btc has come on as an independent developer to give us a review of the Stacks 2.1 upgrade. So welcome, and before we get started with that, let's go through a few things of what this meeting does and some of the updates that are inside of there as well. All right, so first things first, this call covers everything to do with the SIP process on the Stacks blockchain. So this is a chance for you to be able to work as a community to implement features and to do things that you want to see happen with the development of the blockchain. And it's a method where we're able to share ideas, see how the community can work together, and make your case why a certain feature or item should be prioritized. It has methods that allow you to gauge interest and feedback, as well as just a few different ways to go through and say, this is the change I want to see. So when I say SIP, it's a Stacks improvement proposal. This is very similar to what you see with like Bitcoin BIPs and Python pips, and it's a formal excuse me, a formal document that describes exactly what's changing, what those changes affect, how those changes affect things that already exist, or if it's adding new features. And SIPs themselves live on GitHub. So the big one that's coming up around the corner, you can see SIP 12 was Stacks 2.05, which came out about a year ago. And SIP 15 for Stacks 2.1 is right on the horizon. I think we're actually nearly out of draft status with this one. I know a lot came back from the Cavs, but let's go over those updates individually and kind of review some of these slides here. So first off, there's a whole method that SIPs go through, going from draft all the way through implementation, or if they're rejected or withdrawn. So you can see this graph on the right here that kind of describes that process. Generally, when we have an idea or something we want to do with the blockchain, we'll start with a forum post and do like a request for comment. That's a good way to gauge like community sentiment, see if you've got more people behind your idea, and that will lead into forming a draft SIP. After you create the draft SIP, then it's reviewed by a group called the Consideration Advisory Boards. Followed by that, there's a activation criteria that are followed. And as long as those activation criteria are met, the SIP is ratified and the changes are implemented. So of course, a few spots along the way where it could get rejected or it could be withdrawn and replaced with a new one. But for the most part, that's the flow that most of these SIPs go through. Some of the ones that we have listed out here in the slide, you can see that there's some ideas that are in there right now, like a BNS marketplace trait coming from Werner. Muthu, who's been working on improvements for the Stacks nodes. And requests for comments are open. Also, there was the conversation around Bitcoin derivation paths and safe token transfers, which has to do with adding post conditions, if I remember correctly. But there's some tricks to make sure that when you're transferring a token, you know 100% where it's going in certain edge cases. Like most of the time, post conditions cover that, but this was to make things a little bit safer. There's RFC open around miner centralization and what can be done for creating decentralized mining pools, which is actually something that SIP 15 will enable. And a new version of BNS, which has received a lot of comments as well and kind of gone through. So those are some of the open ones for comment. And then in the accepted stage, we have SIP 13 for a semi-fungible token standard. This is like a combination of an NFT and an FT. Or a non-fungible token and a fungible token, and they're really useful for things like one of the easy things to visualize is a concert, right? The NFT is the concert, it's the event. The fungible token would represent tickets to the event. So it's an interesting blend of both, and that has just moved into the accepted stage. Looks like we will be going to review on it pretty soon, actually. And then following that accepted stage, we have activation in progress, which there's SIP 18 for signed structured data. So this is live in the Hero wallet. And I see a note here that we're waiting for something on Stacks 2.1. I'm not sure what piece that is, but I can say that having this signed structured data, it's a super cool feature. It allows you to do some things offline with your keys. Then you're able to like do batch processing. There's a whole bunch of things that it enables. SIP 19 for notifications of new token metadata updates came from Raphael and Matthew. This one is still activation in progress, I guess, but the idea here is that if you print a certain event from your contract, then the metadata can be updated and indexed across a whole bunch of different servers. So it helps keep things in sync when you have like NFT collections where you might do a reveal down the road and you have to update the metadata or something similar, and make sure that everybody is showing the same thing as far as the off-chain correlations to the on-chain data. Finally, we have one in the ratified status that was more recent, and that was SIP 16 with metadata for tokens that came from Frieger and Dan. And that basically set out a standard to say, like, this is the metadata we have, this is how it should be standard, this is how it's going to work for everything moving forward. And that's an overview of just kind of everything going on right now as far as the SIPs. And there's a few others in the draft PR stage as well. So the safe transfer we mentioned a little earlier. These are all, everything you see here is found on the Stacks forum. Or no, I'm sorry, this is from GitHub. So this is all in the GitHub. It's github.com/stacksgov/sips. And you can see wherever there's a pull request, which is basically saying, I want to submit these changes, then you can see how things are drafted and you can read the SIP itself. So you have the safe transfer standard there, which people are welcome to take a look at and comment on. You have a SIP for authentication protocol, catastrophic blockchain failures and recovery. I remember reading through that one. It'd be nice to get some more comments on that and that push through. SIP 15, the big bad stacks 2.1 for upgrading the proof of transfer consensus, and then a SIP for app chains. So these are all different drafts that are still being worked on, and the drafts, once complete, would be reviewed by the respective cabs and then go and flow through the process. So if you want to see any of these, they can be found on the StacksGov GitHub. That's, again, you can see the link down here. It's github.com/stacksgov/sips. All right, and we had a new post on GitHub as well. This one actually came from Mike and myself. We were looking around on mainnet and testnet. We couldn't find all of the related contracts that we needed when we were looking at, like, what's the one we're going to use on testnet? What's the one we're going to use on mainnet? So we had this idea that you could include the deployed contracts as like part of the SIP. So you could show historically, or just give an easy way to link, this is where the actual contracts are. And otherwise, we might do a separate reference or something like that. So I'd expect a PR coming pretty soon following the all the SIP 15 stuff. One of the interesting things about this, though, is with SIP 15 is you can have the compatible traits. But I still think this would be worth having within each SIP just as a reference of like, this is what we did, this is what we deployed, this is that final step of documentation. All right, and then we have a new post on GitHub for SIP 18 as well. Looks like a SIP to describe how Stacks messages are signed. And I would say this open issue, so it's open issue number 90 in the GitHub repo. This would be a good place if you have any comments on the standard for what these signatures look like, which would be similar to something like EIP 712, which is referenced here. Then how would we want to format this moving forward? So those are the kind of questions that if you're involved with message signing, or if you think that's a feature you're going to use, or just have any input at all, the best place to go would be to this issue and start making comments. All right, and then before we get all the way to drafting a SIP, because it is a big, large formal document and you got to be ready to go 100% with all the info, early stage discussions and usually requests for comments would happen on the Stacks forum. So right now, making BNS ready for prime time is a hot topic. This is something that a group is getting together to look at, like, what BNS version 2 could look like and what are some of the challenges or what are some of the upgrades that could be made along the way. And then you can see the safe token transfer standard, which we've seen on GitHub now, so it's kind of moved over there. And standardizing Bitcoin derivation paths, which was a conversation around like how Bitcoin addresses can own items, or how could we have better interaction between the chains. There's a few more. There's BNS fixes, which there's a request for comment on the BNS fixes for Stacks 2.1. There was a topic all about miner centralization, just to see what kind of things we could do to encourage more miners to participate in stacks mining. And then some brainstorming and other items around improving the transaction fees, speeding things up, improving stacking UX. There's also been some working groups that have formed around some of those items as well. So I think we're getting to this place where there's a lot of different entities doing things, and it's absolutely amazing to see. All right, and then there's actually an open question here on the forum as well that came from Jenny that we wanted to share with everyone, and it was around the voting process that's coming up for Stacks 2.1. And for last year's vote, when we did SIP 12, there was a displayed tabulation on the website that would show like in support and against, and just kind of kept a running tally of things as they were going. And I think the big question this year is, do we want to display the tally or the numbers live? Like, is there a reason to show this much in support, this much against, or should those numbers only be shown at the end? That way it doesn't like dissuade anyone from voting, like, oh, there's already a lot of yes votes, I don't feel like I need to vote, or something similar. So this is an open topic for discussion, and it is one that would need an answer pretty quick. So if anybody has a strong opinion or wants to weigh in on this, then definitely visit the Stacks forum and look for this post right here, the suggestion for a fairer vote. And we'll get into CAB approval status here of Stacks 2.1, since that's the big SIP that's out right now. So there are quite a few people on the CABs here. We've got 17 CAB members, 7 working group members, and everybody's from different parts of the community. So this has been really cool to see this expand, and shout out to Hero Gamer for pushing a lot of people to go to the right places and to think about where they fit in, because I'm really happy to see all this participation. And so far, the technical CAB, the economics CAB, and the governance CAB have submitted their reviews. And it sounds like everybody is yes across the board. There were actually a few dissenters in the technical CAB, and some of those comments can be seen in the meeting minutes for the technical CAB. And a quick reference on those. So in the same repository, that github.com/stacksgov SIPs, there's the SIPs themselves, the actual text, and then there's also the definitions or charters for the consideration advisory boards. And there's meeting minutes for when these boards meet to review the SIPs from their area of expertise. So if you wanted to see the conversation or what some of the groups thought about or what they reviewed in regards to this particular SIP, all of that is live public information that you can access on GitHub. And so we have a yes from the technical CAB, from the economics CAB, and the governance CAB. I am not sure if the diversity and ethics CAB were involved on this one. Do you know, Jude? Okay, so in that case, it looks like we're all green lights for activation. So that means as far as the activation is concerned, we're going to go to a vote. So with the vote, there are a few different methods that are available. And quick note on the screenshots here, this URL got messed up, so it's just going to be sip15.xyz. But basically, you have a few different voting methods. If you are a solo stacker, then you can send a dust amount of BTC to a yes or no address, and then what your stacking balance will be counted. If you're stacking in a pool, then you can send a minimal amount of stacks, or 1 micro stacks, to the same yes or no address, just in stacks form. And then your stacking total will be counted towards the vote. And then there's also a method to vote with the liquid stacks balance, which we see here on the right through the ecosystem DAO at stacks.eco. So more information will be coming soon on this, but here's just a little preview of what's going on. And that'll be kind of the next steps as we're progressing towards activation. So with all that out of the way, I think it's time to introduce our guest speaker. So today we have codex.btc here, and he is going to give us a review of SIP 15. Codex, did you have some slides? Looks like he can't unmute.
Yeah, one sec. Let me just do that real quick. We've had some issues with Zoom Bomber, so
I totally understand. It seems the more popular we get, right?
Yeah, here we go.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me well?
Yep.
I'm sitting in the boiler room of this building, so there's this boiler making a bit of noise. So anyway, well, it's great to be talking here. The big brains are here, so I'm going to go through what I think personally. I think I'm going to share my screen. Yes, I do have some slides. Is it also visible now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, I'm trying to press play, but this controls of Zoom are blocking it. Okay. So yeah, so I think in August I did write a review. It was more like it was a blog post, more like a marketing blog post, and I basically started digging into GitHub tickets and wrote a Twitter thread about different areas in Stack 2.0. And then yeah, Hero asked me also to maybe to join this SIP review. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go through different areas and just also talk about what I think. And sure everybody knows here a lot better than I how this whole thing is constructed, but yeah, let's go to it. So basically, as pointed out in the SIP itself, it's particularly mainly covering three aspects: the stacking, clarity, and the block validation. Probably we could say stacking and clarity both are functionalities within clarity, but of course on the stacking side, then it really has implications not only for developers but anybody who is using stacks to stack their stacks. So what I actually first was thinking is moving to proof of transfer 2, which is of course a new smart contract. Everybody has to migrate, and there would be, I think there is no, as far as I understand, there's no automated migration, which of course makes sense to some extent, but it's a one-time operation. But of course, given that it's a breaking network change, breaking change, so yeah, it makes sense. And it has a fixed, I meant not fixed, it has a fixed end date for proof of transfer version 1, which after that the functionalities will be locked and nobody can use that. I think one that of course could have some implications for products that are already built on top of proof of transfer 1, and then they need to migrate. It's not clear if they have taken that into account while they were building their contracts in the first place. And so I don't know how that can impact them, but of course this could be an issue. Yeah, and all the participants, everybody should move to the new contract, but we know this can, of course, this can be for the greater good. And also the sunset of proof of transfer that is removed. I think I see this as a positive thing because first of all, this was significantly amplified in the marketing endeavors, and and many people don't really understand these protocols, but in the future, at some point, once this would be sunset, first of all, it would have been decided from day 1, and second, it would basically turn into proof of burn, which would be, of course, just an arbitrary decision. Well, I wouldn't say arbitrary, of course, there's a reason for it, which is this discount mining. But I think from a messaging perspective for the community and ecosystem, this is, I favor this new mechanism as well, because then, yeah, in case of adversity happening, then the community can decide on the spot to act upon that. And the other one is the payout address, being able to point out where the payout needs to be happening, also being able to pay out to smart contracts that will be adding extra functionalities, because then yeah, it will be unlocking new functionalities for new applications, like compounding, and being able to create services like Lido on Ethereum. And then also on the stacking side, I think the functionalities that I personally would find interesting would be this not having to deal with the cooldowns, because yeah, it happened to me several times. A few of these happened to me personally. That well, the cooldown itself is not interesting. It's not good. I also forgot a few times to restack, and so I missed a few cycles even after the cooldown. And then I also went outside the minimum threshold, which then I was just locked in for a reasonably long period, because my original stacking was, let's say, 6 cycles, and then within the 3rd cycle I was kicked out. So that was not very ideal. And the multiple proof of transfer addresses for delegation operators, I personally didn't need that, but I can imagine that for different of course, this is also, we could say, for retail, they it would be a good use case where you can then delegate to multiple from multiple addresses to the operator. On Clarity v2, I think the versioning, it's clearly a logical step. This is same as Solidity. You point out what version of the language, the interpreter, these should be executed, and the way the contracts would be versioned also makes absolute sense. I think one thing that there is, of course, developers who need to use these contracts should be cautious, definitely, particularly when there is the same function with the same signature has a different behavior, and could be prone to mistakes. So I think that should probably be clearly defined, or in the documentations, on how this can be dealt with, because of course the new functions, Clarity, well, for Clarity v1, Clarity 1 cannot call the new functions of Clarity 2, but if Clarity 2 contracts try to call Clarity 1 contracts, which are happening to be using those functions that have changed, then this could pose unintended behavior, which could be also costly. And so on the new methods, I have listed a few that I personally find interesting. Is STX account. So with proof of transfer 2, which can get the state of the stacking for a specific account. I think that could be quite valuable, especially if you're building an application which leverages proof of transfer for your end users from a composable perspective. That could be good. not only by the first-hand contract that is using those, but also even second or third-hand applications that are being built. You could think of analytics applications or analytics applications that use that sit on top of, like, let's say, developer contract, but also wants to provide insights on the stacking data. And the principle of this struct and construct, which allows the mapping between STX to BTC and basically helping building application which are fully built on top of Bitcoin without the underlying chain being visible. Probably helping maxis with their way at least quiet them down. And and also the function get burn block info. I think this is also quite useful. I believe there was a so at the moment you only just get a burn block header from the get block info, which then requires reconstructing the Bitcoin block to be able to verify, and this, which was not necessarily a convenient thing to do. And so I think this quite useful, particularly when you want to deal with Bitcoin, and probably at later stage if you're on an app chain to deal with the burn chain, well, whichever chain it is. And and I think the utility functions that are there are quite convenient, because at the moment there was a lot of twisting around to figure out how to do operations to, let's say, convert integer to strings, string to integer. So for building a the NFT, just a simple case to get a URI, you had to go through if you had to make sure, if you had you either use a map to map like an integer to a string, or do different kind of higher, more intensive functions or helpers to be able to achieve that. So I think this definitely helps building those building the contract in a much easier way. And the globals, the transaction sponsor, I think this is also quite interesting, especially when a product who is willing to make the chain transparent to their user, and basically making the payment of transaction fees on behalf of them. So in that case, sometimes the end users who use the application would not necessarily need to have STX stacks to be able to interact with the chain. And so in that sense, I think the user experience could be improved a lot on especially less blockchain savvy, tech savvy users. And the chain ID, I think that's just necessary as we are moving towards a multi-chain system, even within the existing within the Stacks ecosystem, given the subnets are being launched soon, and of course later on the app chain. The block validation part is quite complicated, so I'm not going to dive too much deep in it because I don't per se understand it very well. But so I don't have really much of an opinion on it. But so first, actually, I think I missed one. So I will explain the one I have here. The alternative Coinbase recipient, again, the miners being able to pay out to the smart contracts again, they will also be able to create new sort of applications, because then I think this one particularly also can be used when building these centralized mining pools, which is quite crucial. There has been lots of discussions over the past few months over the mining, and at the moment it's quite a challenge in the sense that the number of miners are small, and it would be a bit difficult to defend the decentralization part of it. And of course, under decentralization on the decentralized mining pool, then that would be a big change, and of course it will protect the network and the resiliency. Then the proof of transfer with forkable proof of transfer anchor blocks, which now a Nakamoto consensus would be added for it. I have understood it, but I don't have an opinion on it because I have not digested it yet. So it's yeah, so helping with the current deep reorg, and yeah, and of course the part where the miners to be paid upfront, but not after the work they do, in the sense that the miner is basically keeping the network alive, and they need to get paid for the work they're putting in, and of course they will avoid their wasted resources. And the final title I have is that I think Stack 2.1 has had a lot of improvements over 2.0, particularly for development, and I think adds a new vector and angle into building new applications. It sets the scene for further decentralization and the non-custodial Bitcoin BTC, peg out BTC on the network, which is definitely, which it could be really the click where bringing the crowd. But I'm not, at least 2.1, I don't necessarily think this can flip the narrative, and definitely I think it needs, I think that BTC peg out probably is the big bet, because 2.1, while solving a lot of issues, does not necessarily can create a big momentum for that. And one other point I have is, of course, this is really unlocking a lot of value for fully native Bitcoin applications, completely transparent to stacks. But I think possibly that could have a negative effect on stacks token, which on one side could basically prevent the value accrual on the token, and that could affect either the miner incentives or basically the newcomers incentives to join the network. And I don't know the solution, or must also maybe these are stuff that are already thought of. And I think another big concern I have is the timelines are inconsistent. I understand these are extremely difficult problems to tackle, and requires a lot of organizations, and requires a lot of work to get them out. There are decentralized entities, everybody involved. But from a founder or builder's perspective, these are big risks, given that many of these projects also are projects that are being built using fundings. They are not necessarily getting revenues right off the bat, and in that sense, the timelines have been pushed back a lot, and it could be a red flag for newcomers to be a bit more risk averse and not wanting to build on stacks. Because yeah, that could be, fortunately now, well, fortunately it's a funny word, but we're in a bear market, so there's a lot of time to go through all these issues and build a resilient network. That's it for me, and well, thank you so much for listening.
Thanks for that, Codex. That was excellent.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for throwing that out there, and a lot of good information packed into one set of slides there. So much appreciated. You know, I was thinking about the timeline too, that last little comment, and it's hard with like bigger changes like this. I know when it's kind of like they're done when they're done, but you have to have like certain things set in place, or new things get added, or new things get found. And I have noticed now that, you know, since the dates have been set, they seem to be very firm at this point, that things are moving forward and cranking right along. You know, and I think one of the considerations that we've talked about before, I know came from one of the cabs as well, is that future SIPs would ideally be smaller and more iterative, so that these type of changes would happen a little more often and be a little smaller in size as well.
Thank you. I understand that, and I totally get it, that part, but I think it's more, there's two sides to this, because on the, let's say, building on the SIP, on the development side, these processes, they take time. But I think if on the marketing side, on what is presented, let's say if you go on public Twitter and then there is announcement that the subnets will be released at the end of the first quarter, then this one will be released at this. So, you know, these are directly can translate, especially people who don't come and sit in this conversation, or people who don't go on the the GitHub. I mean, I'm a bit of a nerdy guy to go and it's reading those, but so founders who are trying to break into the ecosystem, when looking at those messages that come, at least on the marketing side, then they make decisions, plan expectations, and that creates a big. It basically creates an existential risk to a business that is being built. So, because of course on the bear market, you don't, you have to survive for the next, I don't know, 2 years, and that's tricky.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there, Codex. We were trying to do 2.1 a lot sooner. The difficulty we face is that, and this is prefacing all this, these are actually actively being addressed by the various ecosystem entities. Right now, at least up until very recently, there had not been as many core developers as we needed to be able to simultaneously make progress on 2.1, as well as deal with the various fires that just come up from the blockchain itself just existing. For example, over the past year, every time there was a big NFT mint, there was often also mempool congestion, and that required doing something about the mempool logic. I think we finally figured out what was going wrong with that, but it takes, you know, real world experience to do that. And then when the world is on fire, you got to stop working on everything else and put the fire out. That's not an excuse. Like, we should have been doing a better job staffing core developers, we being, you know, the whole ecosystem of folks who hire them. And that is being worked on right now as we speak. I think we've doubled the number since we had like even 6 months ago. Other thing that's happening is, if you take a look at GitHub, I believe it's the Stacks blockchain repo, there's been a few working groups set up, one of which is for the non-custodial Bitcoin peg, one is for Bitcoin NFTs. There's a couple others as well. And that's meant to address like inter-entity coordination in order to make it more feasible to do things like, you know, allocate resources in order to make progress on these long-range projects while simultaneously taking care of the day-to-day things. And we had not been doing a good job of that, but we will in the past. But we'll be doing a better job of this going forward. For example, we're trying to get the non-custodial Bitcoin peg operational by like sometime in the middle of next year. We'd love to do at least 2 hard forks a year going forward. because that tends to be like the limiting factor of adding new clarity features, which is a big developer pain point. And also like, adding these bolder features like the non-custodial peg being one example, or better integrations with Bitcoin and things of that nature. I hear you loud and clear. Like, we should have done a better job at the timeline management, and we're taking concrete steps right now to make sure that we don't have this kind of slippage again, especially now that we're in a bear market.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jude. In fact, actually, I tried to apply for, well, I did apply for the core dev blockchain engineer. I was not qualified, so that's okay. But no, thanks a lot for clarifying. No, I totally get it. These are also not easy problems to solve. So it's great to hear now that these are going forward.
Amazing. And yeah, and I did drop a link in the chat as well to those discussions that represent those different working groups. So if that's something that sounded pretty cool to you or something you want to read into, definitely check those out. Lives in the Stacks network GitHub in the Stacks repository. Sweet.
Yeah, and they're open membership. Like, feel free to join. All you have to do is just send a request, post a message on each of those working group discussions. Like, each group has regular meetings, meeting notes and such. I know the SBTC group is probably the most cloistered right now, just because the design is still in flux and we don't want to like mislead people. But the Bitcoin NFT working group is probably the one that has by far the biggest amount of participation at this time, because it's probably the fastest one that we can execute on.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll echo that again too, because I've been helping out with the Bitcoin NFT one and just like watching the development of these different working groups. And if you want to get involved, like, this is a super cool way to just get up to speed on new concepts, play with something that's doesn't exist yet, which is always pretty fun too, to try and solve those kind of problems. And I would definitely encourage anyone interested to check out those working groups.
It's certainly a lot lower lift than trying to write a SIP or something like that.
That's just somewhere to start.
Yeah.
I think another approach for writing a SIP, or think about that, is like, often you look at the requirements for something like that. It's a big formal document. It can be a little intimidating. But when you look at what happens with a lot of them and kind of this structure of going from RFC or just even fleshing out a simple idea or playing with something, it's like by the time you go through all those steps, when you go to write the SIP, you have a lot of the information to fill in. You start to realize where you have gaps, and it kind of just brings it all into that same formal format. We ended up using something similar with CityCoins just because it's a nice way to document how the protocol is evolving over time.
Cool. Yeah, and like SIPs, you don't have to have the SIP first. Like, the SIP can come after everything else is working.
Right. Yeah, and it's a great way too to think of like how other people can, or like how we develop standards together. Like SIPs, when we think of them like in the context of SIP 15 or Stacks 2.1, it's a big change to the blockchain. But what if there was something like a comment standard that you wanted to see in Clarity contracts so they could be parsed? Well, that would be something else you could file a SIP for. Or we also have other tracks and things available where it's like, if you want to be involved in the conversations around governance and the code of conduct and excuse me, different ways people can participate that are not even technical. So there's the different cabs that we showed earlier across a couple different categories. And if there needs to be a new cab, if there's a category that is not represented, that's something else that can be brought up as well. So it's a very flexible process, even though it's formal. And it just has a lot of information. So I would say, if you're interested in being a part of anything like the cabs or the working groups or anything else, just look for the members that are a part of it and reach out to them. Because one thing we have here is an amazing community. Everybody's really good at working together.
For sure. Definitely, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so we talked about, SIP 15, thanks to that great presentation from Codex, and we know it affects stacking, the proof of transfer consensus algorithm. It affects Clarity, the smart contract language, and it affects some things around block validation. This time, I figure we have a few more minutes here to just have an open floor, and if anybody has any questions, ideas, or anything around SIP 15 in particular, or just for the group to hear in general around the SIP process, or anything related to that, this would be a good time if anybody would like to share.
Remember, just raise your hand. I'm not going to mute you.
And don't obsessively click the mute button like me. I almost did it. There's a good 21 Pilots song where one of the lyrics inside of it is, and now I just sit in silence. But that silence means we can move on to the next slide here and take a look. So just a general reminder to take a look at all the different activity going on. So, today we mentioned that there are working groups forming around some new ideas and some new possibilities. There are requests for comment on new ideas and things that may move to SIPs in the future there on the Stacks forum. And then you also have the current drafts and ideas around SIPs that you can find in the GitHub repository, Stacks.gov SIPs. So these are all things that are open to community feedback and open to community participation. Definitely, definitely take a look, get involved, and check them out. And I think that was, okay. So the last slide I have here for everybody is just talking about next week. So the next SIP call, I believe, Hero Gamer will be back and taking the reins again. But we'll be talking about the Stacks 2.1 voting procedures. So as I alluded to earlier, just to review one more time, there's 3 different methods that will be used in order to get the voices. And there will be 2 websites that are kind of shared to help illustrate those methods and make things easier for people. And I think that pretty much closes things out. Let me take a look at the chat here. Nice, Bryce knows my song. Let's see. Jesse says, one idea is it would be good first class access to send Stacks or BTC using a BNS address. So it's very possible today with some code in the wallet, but it might be nice to have as a native feature. Excellent. So I think something like that would be great just to start out as a forum post, because like if everybody piled onto it and wanted to see that as a native feature, I could see it written up and included in one of the next changes. But I don't see any blockers to doing something like that. But so the idea there would be like the way Stacks account exposes a little more information about stacking, and you don't have to look up the locked balance from the POX contract. You could be able to send to a BNS name without having to look up the associated Stacks address. Like that could happen automatically under the hood, if I'm understanding that correctly.
I mean, you could do that with a smart contract right now. Instead of doing like, STX transfer, FT transfer, NFT transfer to a given address, you would just, have a bit of code in place of the recipient that just evaluates to the address given the BNS name. I think there's like, lookup name or something. It's a contract call that you can do into the BNS contract. But sorry, Jason, one sec. You gotta stop muting yourself.
I get a lot of complaints about my loud keyboard, so I have this habit of like mute type, and it's just not working for me right now. Awesome. Yeah, so that's, I guess that would be the open debate too, is like, we want to know, is this something that can be done today? If it can be done today, are the methods reasonable? If the methods are not reasonable, what would be the different experience that we're alluding to, which would be like having that built in or something like it. But that's what this process is all about, right? Like that's why I think those kind of discussions are fun to have. And I do think a question like that and seeing what others think and kind of like walking through the experience that others have had too, from like wallet providers to a lot of the different front ends and UIs. Like we have some options to support that kind of lookup and that kind of activity, but I think we're all doing our own approaches right now. So it'd be interesting even just to standardize that in a way and to take a look at like what is the best way to send to a BNS address.
Yeah, for sure. I would imagine like that. I mean, I mentioned using it within the contract, but like maybe if we're going to change the BNS contract every so often, which I think is one thing that the BNS working group is actively considering, It might just be something that happens in the wallet. Like the wallet looks up what the current BNS contract is, then from that current BNS contract looks up the name to get the address, and then just puts the address right in place. Then you don't have to worry about coding to the wrong contract on the Stacks chain.
Oh, that makes sense, because like abstracted up a layer from front ends and UIs and everything like that.
Yeah, just a thought. Like, I'm sure this is something that the BNS working group is going to be thinking about a lot as well. But yeah, like whatever people want to do, we'll make happen.
All right. Well, I think unless anybody else has anything they'd like to bring up or cover, I think this would be a good place to kind of end things. And again, thank you to Codex for coming on and giving your presentation over Stacks 2.1. Thank you everybody for dealing with me as the guest host. And
Thanks, Jason.
here you go. Mahmoud says Jude for president. Here we go.
All right, thanks everyone. I'll post the recording on Twitter momentarily.
All right, take care everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.